know, we can choose to look at this as boring, or we can choose to look at this as killing time until we die.
In 1997, a TV critic wrote that until he watched Steve Carell in a new ABC sitcom, he had never known true horror. That show lasted 2 weeks, and Carell loved that review so much, he's been reading it out loud for nearly 30 years. Welcome to the graveyard of 90s workplace sitcoms, shows that promised big things, delivered spectacular failures, and somehow launched the careers of some of the biggest stars in television history. Today, we're digging up 10 workplace comedies from the 1990s that most people have completely forgotten, but probably shouldn't have. Because hidden in these failures are Sandra Bullock's first starring role, Neil Patrick Harris before Barney Stinson, Tony Shalhoub before Monk, and an entire cast of future Emmy winners serving seafood at a Massachusetts diner. These aren't just bad shows. These are fascinating time capsules of network politics, ahead of their time formats, and the brutal reality of what it takes to survive on television. Some lasted a single season. Some lasted a single month. One literally predicted its own cancellation in the script. Let's start at the beginning. Number 10. Working Girl. Before Sandra Bullock was driving that bus in Speed, before she was winning an Oscar for The Blind Side, she was Tess McGill, a spunky Staten Island secretary, trying to make it in Manhattan. Working Girl premiered on NBC on April 16, 1990, as a TV adaptation of the hit Melanie Griffith movie from 1988. The film had been a massive success, earning Griffith an Oscar nomination, and NBC figured they could bottle that lightning for weekly television. Here's the thing, though. Sandra Bullock wasn't even the first choice for the role. Nancy McKeon from The Facts of Life was originally cast as Tess McGill, but she dropped out just weeks before filming. Bullock auditioned as her replacement, and this became her first major television role. The show featured Carly Simon's Oscar-winning song, Let the River Run, as its theme music. And the cast included Nana Visitor before Deep Space Nine, George Newbern, who would later voice Superman in Justice League, and David Schramm, who played Roy on Wings. Critics were not kind. The Washington Post wrote that while the movie wasn't much, Melanie Griffith's dewy-eyed charm saved it. But by sharp contrast, the TV version has precisely zero compensations. One critic specifically noted that Bullock lacks the fuzzy but tough quirkiness of Melanie Griffith's Tess. Metacritic gave it a score of 34 out of 100, generally unfavorable. NBC scheduled it Monday nights at 8:30, directly against MacGyver on ABC. The ratings were brutal. NBC pulled the series after just 8 episodes. They had produced 12, which means 4 completed episodes, including ones called Get Back and Two's a Crowd. Never even aired. But here's what makes this fascinating. After Bullock became an A-list movie star, TV Land actually brought the show back for reruns in the mid-1990s. One retrospective later noted that the best thing that came out of this show was more exposure for Sandra, who finally had a major credit on her resume. The writer concluded that Working Girl allowed her to test her skills in a new format and make her decide, thankfully, to pursue film instead. Number 9, The Office, 1995. Now, before you say anything, no, this is not that Office. This is the other Office, the one nobody remembers, the one that predated the British version by nearly a decade. On March 11, 1995, CBS premiered a workplace sitcom called The Office, starring 4-time Emmy winner Valerie Harper. She played Rita Stone, a divorced secretary who had been at Package Inc., a package design company in Chicago, for 19 years. The show was billed as an office comedy version of Upstairs Downstairs, contrasting the lives of executives with the secretaries who actually kept the place running. Creator Susan Beavers drew from her own experience as a $75 a week secretary. The pilot was directed by Jay Sandrich, who had directed The Cosby Show and The Mary Tyler Moore Show. This had pedigree. And the cast. Oh, the cast is where it gets interesting. Playing Beth Avery was Deborah Jo Rupp, years before she became Kitty Foreman on That 70s Show. Playing Bobby Harold was Gary Dourdan, years before he became Warwick Brown on CSI. And playing Steve Gilman was Kevin Conroy, who by 1995 was already the voice of Batman in the animated series. Variety praised the strong chemistry, but criticized the thin observations, predictable dialogue, and absurd complications. The Virginian pilot was even harsher, writing that The Office is just about as entertaining as The Boys Are Back, the show it replaces. That's no compliment.
Don't forget the cream.
There is no cream.
I brought some in.
CBS gave it the Saturday night death slot at 9 p.m. It pulled a 6.6 household rating, roughly 6.3 million viewers, and ranked 119th out of 146 shows that season. My Guy was completed, but never aired. This was Valerie Harper's fourth failed starring vehicle after Rhoda ended and after her contentious firing from Valerie in 1987. Today, you can actually buy episodes on Google Play if you're curious. But almost nobody is. Number 8. The George Wendt Show. Speaking of Cheers alumni who couldn't catch a break, let's talk about George Wendt. When Cheers ended in 1993, after 11 legendary seasons, every cast member was looking for their next big thing. Kelsey Grammer got Frasier. It ran for 11 more years and won 37 Emmys. So what did George Wendt get? A show about car mechanics. The George Wendt Show premiered on CBS on March 8, 1995. Wendt played George Coleman, a bachelor who owns an auto repair shop in Madison, Wisconsin, with his brother Dan. But here's the twist. They also co-host a call-in radio show called Points and Plugs, where they give car repair advice and life advice. The concept was loosely inspired by NPR's Car Talk with Tom and Ray Magliozzi. The Buffalo News captured the frustration perfectly. The move for Wendt after Cheers couldn't have been simpler. A spin-off called Norm to star America's favorite beer-swilling fat guy. Put it on right after Frasier and you'd be in business. But no, he had to go for this clunker. The pilot actually stirred up some controversy when the Catholic League criticized it for its crude portrayal of nuns and priests. The premiere pulled 15.7 million viewers, which sounds good until you realize it dropped fast. The show ended up with a 7.8 household rating average. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 10%. The Washington Post said Wendt looks uncomfortable and disgruntled, and well, he should be. Nothing really works. CBS canceled it after 6 episodes. 2 more had been produced, but never aired. The creators expressed frustration over what they called network-mandated adjustments that altered the show's original tone. George Wendt became the only major Cheers cast member who never got a successful follow-up series. He went on to reprise Norm Peterson in cameos on Frasier, The Simpsons, and Family Guy, but he never headlined another show. George Wendt passed away on May 20th, 2025, at age 76. Number 7. Charlie Hoover. What if the voice inside your head suddenly became visible? And what if that voice was played by one of the most controversial, explosive comedians of the late 1980s?
What, the brunette? Whoa, I want her!
What's the matter with you?
I'm just trying to liven things up.
Well, don't.
That was the premise of Charlie Hoover, which premiered on Fox on November 9th, 1991. Tim Matheson played Charlie, a man who turns 40 and suddenly manifests his inner ID as a 12-inch tall loudmouth named Hugh. And Hugh was played by Sam Kinison. For those who don't remember, Sam Kinison was a former Pentecostal preacher turned shock comedian whose screaming delivery and controversial material made him one of the most talked about stand-up acts of the era. He joked that he took the role to prove he could do family entertainment and that he had been falsely persecuted, that he couldn't. The supporting cast included Bill Maher, yes, that Bill Maher, as Elliot Weedle, a creepy co-worker. This was years before politically incorrect and real time. The show had significant technical challenges. The special effects required Kinison to stand still, while two cameras were coordinated to make him appear tiny alongside Matheson. According to reports, this suffocated Kinison's natural, high-energy performance style. Critics destroyed it. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 0% from 5 reviews. The Deseret News called it submoronic, an idiotic creation stuffed with crude jokes. Another critic wrote, Sam Kinison stars as Tim Matheson's 12-inch high alter ego. That's pretty much all you need to know about this extraordinarily unfunny new sitcom. The show was canceled in December 1991 after just 7 episodes due to poor ratings, among the lowest rated primetime shows of the season. Here's an important clarification that often gets confused online. The show was not canceled because of Sam Kinison's death. Kinison died in a car accident on April 10th, 1992, approximately 4 months after the show had already been canceled. This was his only regular television series role. The premise wasn't completely dead, though. In 1995, the WB launched Unhappily Ever After, which featured Bobcat Goldthwait as an inner voice bunny. That show ran for 100 episodes and 5 seasons. Charlie Hoover is not available on DVD or streaming anywhere. Number 6. Bakersfield PD. Sometimes a show fails, not because it's bad, but because it's too early.
Hi, Kessler. Hey, Captain, you gonna play poker with these guys tonight, too?
Poker?
Bakersfield PD premiered on Fox on September 14, 1993, and it looked different from every other sitcom on television. That's because it was shot in single-camera format with no laugh track, a style that wouldn't become standard until The Office in 2005 and Arrested Development in 2003. The show starred Giancarlo Esposito, years before Gus Fring, as Paul Gigante, a sophisticated, half-black, half-Italian detective from Washington, D.C., who relocates to rural Bakersfield, California. He's partnered with Wade Preston, a laid-back local cop who's obsessed with TV cop shows. The culture clash drove the comedy. There were police chases on rollerblades. There was a cow napping. The theme music was composed by Mark Mothersbaugh from Devo. Esposito told Entertainment Weekly in 1993, "I don't think we've seen a guy with this kind of mixed ethnic background on TV before." The cast also included Ron Eldard, Tony Plana, who later starred in Ugly Betty, Chris Mulkey from Twin Peaks, and Brian Doyle Murray, Bill Murray's brother. Guest stars included William H. Macy and Dan Castellaneta, the voice of Homer Simpson. Critics actually liked it. The Los Angeles Times called it about as witty as television gets. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 67% approval. IMDb users have rated it 8.5 out of 10, though that's only from 353 ratings, which tells you how few people have actually seen it. Despite the quality, the ratings weren't there. It ranked 104th for the season with a 4.26 rating. Fox canceled it after 17 episodes. Years later, the cable channel Trio actually featured Bakersfield PD in its brilliant but canceled programming block. It's never been officially released on DVD. Only bootlegs exist. And Giancarlo Esposito? He went on to become one of the most respected character actors in television history. Gus Fring in Breaking Bad, Moff Gideon in The Mandalorian. The man has range. Number 5. Teech. This one has a dark ending, so bear with me. Teech premiered on CBS on September 18, 1991. It starred Phil Lewis as Teech Gibson, an African-American music teacher hired at Winthrop Academy, an elite, predominantly white prep school in Philadelphia. He's the only black person at the institution, and he's assigned to teach the Gang of Four, a group of troublemaking students given to him as punishment. The show featured B.B. King performing the theme song Teach Me and making a guest appearance as Teech's Uncle Isaac. The guest cast also included Kathy Kinney before she became Mimi on The Drew Carey Show, and Kelly Rutherford years before Gossip Girl. The Sun Sentinel published a brutal review on September 18, 1991, the same day it premiered. A comedian of unlimited potential is a terrible thing to waste. Teech does it, though. The new CBS comedy squanders the talents of infectiously likable newcomer Phil Lewis by allowing his first starring vehicle to degenerate into a shameless stream of racial slurs. Those responsible for Teech should be ashamed of themselves. CBS scheduled it Wednesday nights at 8:30 against NBC's Unsolved Mysteries. The ratings were poor. CBS pulled it after only 4 episodes. 9 completed episodes never aired. And then came December 28, 1991. 2 months after the show was canceled, Phil Lewis was involved in a drunk driving accident in Potomac, Maryland. Isabel Duarte, a 21-year-old Portuguese immigrant who worked as a nanny, was killed when Lewis's car crossed the center line. His blood alcohol level was 0.29%, nearly 3 times the legal limit. Lewis was convicted of vehicular manslaughter in November 1992. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison, 2 years probation, and 350 hours of community service. But this isn't where his story ends. Lewis rebuilt his career. He became beloved as Mr. Mosby on Disney Channel's The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, which ran from 2005 to 2011. He became a prolific television director, working on shows like Two Broke Girls and One Day at a Time. In an interview about an interracial kiss scene on Teech, Lewis had said, "Look, man, this is 1991. We shouldn't have to worry about this." Number 4. Stark Raving Mad. Sometimes shows fail because they're bad. Sometimes they fail because of bad luck. And sometimes they fail despite literally winning a People's Choice Award. Stark Raving Mad premiered on NBC on September 23, 1999, as part of the legendary must-see TV Thursday night lineup. The show starred Tony Shalhoub as Ian Stark, an eccentric horror novelist who researches death by staging elaborate, morbid practical jokes, fake hangings, placing his decapitated head on couches. Neil Patrick Harris played Henry McNeely, his germophobic, neurotic new editor. Think about this cast for a second. Tony Shalhoub and Neil Patrick Harris, 2 actors who would go on to define iconic television characters, sharing the screen together. The creator was Stephen Levitan, who would later co-create Modern Family. The pilot was directed by James Burrows, who had directed Cheers, Friends, and Frasier. And here's the ironic part. After the show was canceled, both leads found massive success playing the exact opposite of their characters. Shalhoub, who played Carefree Ian, won 3 Emmys as the obsessive-compulsive detective Adrian Monk. Harris, who played uptight Henry, became America's favorite carefree womanizer as Barney Stinson on How I Met Your Mother. The show ranked number 19 among all programs that season. It averaged 15.5 million viewers. It won the People's Choice Award for Favorite New Television Comedy Series in January 2000. And NBC canceled it anyway. The competition was brutal. ABC had launched Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and it was demolishing everything in its path. Stark Raving Mad was also struggling to retain the audience from its lead-in, Frasier, even though Frasier was still a hit. Critics were mixed. Variety said, its few real laughs look almost like accidents. The Washington Post called it an ugly little item on many levels. But the audience loved it. NBC officially canceled the show on April 15, 2000. 22 episodes were produced, but only 18 aired. Decades later, fans are still searching for it. One IMDb reviewer wrote, "Why was this excellent show ever canceled? 22 years later, and I still Google it to see if I can watch it again." There's no official DVD release, no streaming. The only way to watch Stark Raving Mad is through bootleg recordings from original VHS broadcasts, some of which have surfaced on Internet Archive. Number 3. Over the Top. Remember that Steve Carell review I mentioned at the beginning? Let's get into it. Over the Top premiered on ABC on October 21st, 1997. Tim Curry starred as Simon Ferguson, a flamboyant British soap opera actor who gets fired from his show, Days to Remember, and moves into the Manhattan Hotel, run by his ex-wife Hadley, played by Annie Potts. They had been married for only 12 days, 20 years earlier. Steve Carell played Yorgo Galfanikos, the hotel's psychotic Greek chef who idolizes Simon. The show had an interesting pedigree. Both Curry and Potts were also producers. The consulting producer was Amy Sherman Palladino, who would later create Gilmore Girls. Guest stars included John Ritter, Danny Strong, and Drake Bell. The reviews were catastrophic. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 17%. The Los Angeles Daily News called it the worst new show of the season, adding that if you tuned in at 8:30, you would probably be watching something else by 8:38. And then there was Peter Coe's review on TV.com, which became legendary. I have stood in a freezer full of dead people at the morgue. I have seen a man's scalp pulled back over his nose. But I can now honestly say that until Steve Carell's turn in the premiere of Over the Top, I have never known true horror. Steve Carell loves that review. He's read it publicly at the 2006 Television Critics Association Awards when The Office won. He's read it on The Late Show with David Letterman. He read it again at the 2015 Santa Barbara International Film Festival. The premiere drew 7.88 million viewers. By episode 2, it dropped to 6.35 million. Episode 3 pulled 6.97 million. And then it was over. The show had problems from the start. Executive producer Robert Morton was reportedly dating ABC Entertainment president Jamie Tarses when the series was picked up. Their relationship ended before the premiere, which fueled industry rumors. The premiere was delayed from September to October for retooling. It launched against the World Series with minimal promotion. ABC pulled it after just 3 episodes. 12 episodes had been produced, meaning 9 never aired in the United States. Those episodes eventually circulated among Tim Curry fans, initially with Finnish subtitles from international broadcasts. Some are now on YouTube and Internet Archive. Number 2. Townies. If you want to see where the late 1990s and 2000s television landscape was born, look no further than a canceled sitcom about a seafood diner in Massachusetts. Townies premiered on ABC on September 18, 1996. The premise was simple. 3 20-something lifelong friends work at the Pelican, a seafood diner in Gloucester, Massachusetts, a New England fishing town. They deal with relationships, dead-end jobs, and dreams of escaping for the big city. Critics compared it to Mystic Pizza and called it ABC's attempt to replicate Friends. The cast is absolutely absurd in retrospect. Molly Ringwald, the face of 1980s teen movies, played Carrie Donovan. Jenna Elfman played Shannon, 1 year before she won a Golden Globe for Dharma and Greg. Lauren Graham played Denise, 4 years before Gilmore Girls. Ron Livingston played Kurt, 3 years before Office Space made him a cult hero. Bill Burr, credited as Billy Burr, played Ryan over a decade before he became one of the biggest stand-up comedians in the world. Guest stars included Eric McCormick, 2 years before Will and Grace, and Heather Matarazzo before The Princess Diaries. The show was produced by Carsey Werner, the company behind Roseanne and The Cosby Show. The creator, Matthew Carlson, would later work on Malcolm in the Middle and the Wonder Years reboot. The premiere drew 15 million viewers. Rotten Tomatoes has it at 30%, with the critics' consensus reading, "Those awaiting Molly Ringwald's comeback will be sorely disappointed by Townies, a listless comedy about arrested development." The Minneapolis Star-Tribune wrote, "The wealth of cheap sexual jokes indicate that the show's heart is in its pelvis." The Sacramento Bee was more direct. "Our pick for the first show, canceled this fall." They were right. ABC pulled Townies in December 1996 and replaced it with Coach. 15 episodes were produced, but only 10 aired in the United States. Here's an interesting footnote. When Jamie Tarsis became the new ABC president, she reportedly especially disliked female-centered shows that had been greenlit by her predecessor, Ted Harbert. Townies was one of the casualties. And here's a piece of television history that almost nobody knows. Townies was one of the very first series ever made available for streaming. In 2001, all 15 episodes were available on an experimental Yahoo platform for about a year. Today, you can only watch it through fan uploads on Internet Archive, sourced from Australian VHS recordings. Number 1. Action. We saved the most controversial for last. Action premiered on Fox on September 16, 1999, and it immediately made television history by becoming the first broadcast series to receive a TVMA rating. Jay Moore starred as Peter Dragon, a ruthless Hollywood producer whose $150 million film Slow Torture just bombed catastrophically. Now he's desperately trying to produce his comeback project, Beverly Hills Gun Club, while navigating studio politics, backstabbing executives, and his own terrible personality. Illeana Douglas played Wendy Ward, a former child star turned prostitute who becomes Peter's vice president of production. The supporting cast included Buddy Hackett and R. Lee Ermey. The story editor was Will Fortin, years before Saturday Night Live and The Last Man on Earth. Executive producers included Joel Silver and Ted Dim. The show featured celebrity cameos from Keanu Reeves, Sandra Bullock, and Salma Hayek playing themselves. The theme song was Warren Zevon's "Even a Dog Can Shake Hands." Critics were polarized, but fascinated. The New York Times called it truly subversive and daring in its scabrous attitude. The Washington Post said it was the most daring and outrageous new comedy of the season. Entertainment Weekly gave it a B, praising how it shreds Hollywood corporate culture more viciously than current big-screen spoofs like Bowfinger and The Muse. The Hollywood Reporter summed it up as irreverent, gross, cynical, disgusting, and, a lot of the time, embarrassingly funny. The problem? Fox scheduled it Thursday nights at 9 p.m. against Frasier and WWF Wrestling. The ratings couldn't survive that competition. HBO had actually wanted to pick up the series, but creator Chris Thompson chose Fox's higher budget. In retrospect, this might have been a mistake. The show was arguably too edgy for broadcast television in 1999. Showrunner Don Rio later revealed, one episode was initially rejected by the Fox censors because of the second blowjob. They were good with one, but two crossed the line. Illeana Douglas mentioned that one episode was so disturbing it never aired. All I can tell you is our guest star was Ice Cube, and it's brilliant. Fox pulled the show after 8 episodes. 13 had been produced. The final episodes contained meta-references to the show's own cancellation, including Peter Dragon, legally dying at 9:30 Thursday night, the show's time slot. Years later, Douglas reflected on the failure. People were saying Action and something called The West Wing were the shows that were going to change television. People say they want something different, but maybe we were a little too different. The Hollywood Reporter published a 20th anniversary retrospective in June 2019, noting that Action is now cited as a precursor to both Entourage and BoJack Horseman. Unlike most shows on this list, you can actually watch Action today. It's available on the Roku channel for free, with ads, plus Prime Video and Apple TV. Conclusion. So what do we learn from digging through the 90s sitcom graveyard? First, talent doesn't guarantee survival. These shows featured Sandra Bullock, Steve Carell, Neil Patrick Harris, Tony Shalhoub, Giancarlo Esposito, Lauren Graham, Jenna Elfman, Bill Burr, people who went on to define the next 2 decades of television and film. But in the moment, none of that mattered. The ratings weren't there, the time slots were wrong, or the network politics killed them before they had a chance. Second, being ahead of your time is a curse. Bakersfield PD pioneered single-camera comedy without a laugh track a full decade before that format took over television. Action pushed boundaries that wouldn't become acceptable until cable dramas normalized them years later. The Office, the 1995 one, explored mundane workplace dynamics before Ricky Gervais made it cool. Third, the business of television is often more brutal than the art. Over the Top got greenlit reportedly because a producer was dating a network president. Townies got canceled when a new network president purged her predecessor's projects. Stark Raving Mad won a People's Choice Award and still got axed. And finally, failure doesn't have to be the end. Phil Lewis went from vehicular manslaughter conviction to beloved Disney Channel star. Steve Carell turned true horror into a career-long joke. Giancarlo Esposito went from cow napping in Bakersfield to running a drug empire in Albuquerque. These shows existed. Real people made them. Real audiences watched them, briefly, and then they disappeared, existing only in TV Guide archives, bootleg VHS recordings, and the memories of the few who were paying attention. If you want to hunt them down, Action is on Roku. Everything else? Good luck. Check Internet Archive. Search for Finnish subtitled Tim Curry footage. Dig through fan uploads from Australian broadcasts. Because sometimes the most interesting television history isn't what succeeded. It's what failed, and why, and who survived to try again. Thanks for watching. If you remember any of these shows, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you know of any other forgotten workplace sitcoms from this era, let me know.